So good morning, everyone. I love the fact I got Stella McCartney and Farfetch in the front row, but this won't be a fashion show, I'm afraid. This will be a presentation about the journey we've been on at the BBC, and I guess particularly about, and interesting, we were talking about measures of success, and interesting, the title of the conference is Making Creative Work Flow Better. I think from my point of view, this is about making the creative work better, and about having a greater impact through that work. And that's the story we want to tell this morning, about how we feel that creative operations and the work that Jim and his team did made a huge difference, not just to the way in which we operated and our processes, but to the quality of the work itself. So the story. So BBC Creative, we were born on the 6th of January 2016. And prior to its creation, all of the BBCs, we produced 1,500 campaigns a year, so it's a huge volume business we're in. But all of those campaigns were created through external agencies, and the bulk through an exclusive 10-year contract we had with an agency called Red Bee. And triggered by the end of that contract, we went through a really thorough process to recommend what the right solution should be going forward. And we recommended creating a new integrated in-house team capable of producing all of the BBC's marketing campaigns as quickly as we could prove our worth. And I guess that last point is really important. We had a lot of very skeptical people in the business to say, well, the current model isn't working. How is an in-house team going to work? So we certainly had to prove our worth. So on the 6th of January 2016, 60 people from Red Bee arrived inside the BBC to join about 35 people from teams inside the BBC. And it was a bit like an orphanage. We had people joining and coming together, and we started to try and create a culture to welcome people. But the plea from my boss was very simple: please don't fuck up. And so we started pedaling very hard. The important thing for me setting up the team was to signal change. I think the risk for us, it was seen as the old model, but just inside the BBC, with all the problems of that old model inherent in the way that we worked. So we needed to signal change. And so in April 2016, ECD's Aidan McClure and Laurent Simon arrived from Adam and Eve. And that was really important for us because it did very quickly signal that change both internally and, as you'll see from this chart, externally as well. It was only when the BBC announced that it had hired Aidan McClure and Laurent Simon as executive creative directors that the broadcaster looked serious. I'm not sure what that said about me, but anyway, that aside, it was a very important signal that we were ambitious for our creative work. And for those who don't know Adam and Eve, or indeed Aidan and Laurent, they were responsible for Hare and the Bear, which was one of the most successful John Lewis Christmas campaigns. So they were seen as rising stars in the business, and really interesting for the business that they decided to come to an in-house team. And I'm sure there'll be a theme that comes up through the conference about the power of in-house creativity and how actually the ad industry are looking at what we're doing inside brands quite interestingly. So I think the next thing that we had to do is create a vision and an ambition that was meaningful to us and indeed the organisation. And our ambition that we created together was very simple: to create world-class marketing for a world-class media organisation. And I think this vision was important for a number of different reasons. Firstly, it put our ambition as marketers on the same level as the best of the BBC's editorial content. And I think in terms of the BBC, understandably, is a very editorially led business that hasn't necessarily embraced marketing in the past in the way that it needs to now. So we needed to prove very quickly that we could create content that's as good as the best of editorial content. And like many brands, I'm sure, in this room, we are having to fight, particularly for younger audiences, in an era of Netflix and Amazon in a way we've never had to fight before. Secondly, it placed the ambition of BBC Creative alongside the ambition of marketing at the BBC. And you'll hear a lot from Jim about how important it was that we integrated our ambition with the ambition of our in-house marketing team and also our in-house media team. And that we had big ambitions, but we had shared ambitions with those other teams. So with this ambition and with Aidan Laurent on board, we brought in new creative talent. We worked very hard to create a culture of creative ambition, and we pedalled even harder. But after 6 months of this, we could see that although the work was getting better, it wasn't as good as we wanted, and indeed it needed to be. And there was no doubt that the marketing teams, and indeed a lot of BBC Creative, were missing some of the structures and the processes they'd left behind, either at Red Bee or in other agencies. And interesting, I was under a lot of pressure to bring in account management, which I resisted, because I felt it smacked of the old client-agency relationship. So my instinct was that the answer lay in some sort of look at the way we worked and in our processes. And again, my instinct that the answer lay not in account management, but in some form of project management. But I felt I needed someone with the right expertise to come in and look at what we were doing and the way we were doing it to come up with the right solution. So at that point, I called in Jim from White Door, and he's going to pick up the story from here.
Thank you very much, Justin. Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to talk about some of the things we discovered when we first started working with the BBC, how we approached finding solutions to the things we discovered and preserving the things that needed to be preserved. And then I'm going to hand back to Justin, who's going to talk about the results of that work and what changed and how it made a kind of tangible difference to the work. And then I'll just finish off with some key learnings at the end. So, as Justin said, our brief was to help them get from good work without mishaps, without fucking up, to consistently great work, but with less friction. And to deliver 15,000 assets a year. So not much pressure then. So a bit about our approach. First and foremost, this wasn't about just delivering off-the-shelf solutions. It was vital to get a real understanding of the team we were working with, identifying the brilliant things that needed to be kept, as well as uncovering the things that needed to be fixed. And then to get to the right solutions, we had to be sure that we were asking the right questions so that we could give an impartial, objective, and informed assessment of how things stand and what needs to happen. And also that our solutions were simple, straightforward, and above all, implementable. Now, the thing about creative operations is there's never a once-in-a-lifetime solution. So it's vital to measure how things are working. And to your point, Teresa, we'll be talking a bit later about some of the measurements we put in place. And that's because in creative operations, better never really stops. It's a constant journey in improvement. So how did we go about that? When managing change in creative operations, it's essential to take a holistic view. Because if you change any one of these areas, it has an impact on all the others, and vice versa. So that in turn, all of these in turn affect behaviour. And what changes culture? Behaviour every time. So, day one, what did we find? Well, 100 people dedicated and committed. But like any large creative organisation, the BBC can get blown off course from time to time. And Justin and his team were determined not to let that happen. However, the people working at the coalface told us that it was a bit like wading through treacle. Now, everybody loves a challenge, especially creative people. Give me the freedom of a really tight brief and all that. But the challenges were the wrong kind. It was kind of an unintended obstacle course. Having said that, hundreds of projects have been delivered on time, just. And in this case, just on time wasn't a Japanese methodology. It was an accident through the way of working. They'd won Campaign of the Week, so there was some real industry, Campaign Ad of the Week, I should say. There was some real industry plaudits, with Campaign amongst others, but there was room for plenty more, and there was a hunger, as Justin has said, a hunger to earn more. As a startup, they'd really hit the ground running. I think it was a fantastic achievement. 100 people starting up in January 2016, and they literally hit the ground running. I've never seen a startup do that before, ever. It was amazing. But there was this hunger to do better. So we delved a little deeper, and this is what we found. In essence, the process that BBC Creative had wasn't working. Sorry, the process that BBC Creative didn't have wasn't working. In fact, the people who came from Red Bee brought part of their process. Others applied things that they'd learnt had worked really well for them in the past. And some people were just muddling along, making it up as they went along. And the result of that was specialists such as design, radio, digital, were often not brought into a project until the very last minute. And you can imagine what effect that had on the work. There were just too many silos within creative. Over above that, the resourcing, when creatives are allocated to jobs, was disruptive. What do I mean by that? Well, creatives who were given weeks to work on a brief, in theory, were finding that in practice, they only had a few hours to work on the most important, prestigious projects. And it didn't help that creative and marketing and the in-house media team saw themselves as separate functions. So they were all working on their own little bit of the project rather than taking responsibility for the whole thing. So as a result of that, projects were managed in 3 separate bits. And you can imagine what that's like. Imagine breaking a project up into 3 completely disconnected bits. It doesn't work. So there was plenty to be getting on with. Nothing we hadn't seen within previous projects. But it was clear that if we didn't extend the brief to look at how marketing are working with creative, marketing are working with media, and media are working with creative, then our efforts could well have been wasted. So it's really important to think about how can we do this? How can we get these people working together when they just haven't been? And so we decided to take a kind of engage for change approach. Because again, within a creative environment, as I'm sure you all know, top-down directive change doesn't work. So we got them to participate in shaping the changes. We needed the whole team to embrace change and unite around a new way of working, a new process, if you like. So we needed to create a coalition between marketing, media, and creative. So the way we did that was in 3 ways. First of all, one-to-one interviews. And this was like therapy for some of them. We literally had people with tears in their eyes in some of the meetings. Other people, very strong opinions, very forceful. But the point was, through the interviews and some co-creation workshops, which I'll come back to in a minute, and a survey, we gave everyone an opportunity to have their say. So everyone who wanted to could contribute. People aired their frustrations and shared their solutions. It meant that the process wasn't our process, it was becoming their process. And that was really important, that they didn't see us as some kind of external consultants telling them how to work. We helped them discover the best way to work. And it worked. People were soon coming up to us in the corridor saying, when can we start using the new process? So it was brilliant. They actually wanted to employ a new process, which was great. And so everybody was enthusiastic, keen, but we'd identified a number of challenges that were going to get in the way. So first and foremost, there was a very poor visibility of incoming work. At times, briefs just kind of dropped out of the sky with very little time to respond and even less time to refine the brief before work started. And the creative team were obviously too busy doing the work to get engaged in tracking and managing the marketers' briefs, not that they should have to do that. As a result, as I mentioned earlier, the creative resourcing was reactive. It meant that a brief would go to who's available as opposed to who's best to work on the project. And creatives were used to working with marketers and clients. There was 10 years of ingrained behaviour between creative and marketing and vice versa. So there was still a kind of client-agency relationship, whereas in reality, they were all colleagues working together against the competition. And there was a definite feeling that each of these functions felt solely responsible for their own bit. So it's kind of, as long as I get this brief off my desk or this work, this idea cracked or this edit finished, I'm all right. So it's baton passing rather than working against the competition. Not surprisingly, out of all of this, there was a huge level of uncoordinated, conflicting feedback coming from the various marketing and editorial decision makers. And that was driving a high level of rework. In fact, the creatives told us that up to 30% of their time, 30% of their time was spent on unnecessary work. You imagine what you could do with a 30% increase in capacity of your creative team. And actually, it was those co-creation workshops that I mentioned that identified 42 different causes of that unnecessary work. So I thought you might like to know just a little bit more about how those workshops worked. So usually these are one-day workshops broken into two halves. The first half is spent mapping out the current ways of working, and we identify with the team, cross-functional team, so we've got marketers, creative, media, all in the same room working together, and we identify the moments of magic, the things that need to be preserved, and the moments of madness, which are the things that definitely need to be fixed. It's a cathartic experience which people really enjoy. You say to people, would you like to come to a process workshop? They go, oh my God, no. But actually get them in the room and give them their say. They absolutely love it. So it was great. They really enjoyed that. So the second half moves from cathartic to creative, and it's creating the new way of working together. This was the first time that marketing, media, and creative had worked together on the way they worked together. It was a highly effective step forward in terms of creating the collaboration that would be so necessary for BBC Creative moving forward, making the work better and more effective. Which brings me neatly to the solutions. So, there were many changes, far too many to cover in this session today, so I'm just going to focus on the main things that made a difference. It was abundantly clear from the interviews and workshops that we needed to build a way of working, a process that had collaboration at its heart. We had to bring these three different functions together. So what I'm not going to bore you with is loads and loads of process charts. I'm going to talk more about the creation of the process and how we brought it to life. So critical to bringing it to life was creating what we called purpose-built teams on every project. So each project would start from the beginning with a team identified to work together, comprising media, creative, and marketing. So right from the beginning. And that fostered a broad sense of responsibility and accountability for the whole project, rather than each department just owning their own bit. And the process was the three sides of the triangle, if you like, that brought those together. Now, in the broadcast industry, there's a term they use which is green light. And what this means is when a program is given the go-ahead for production. So way before the marketing, the decision to make a new program. And we designed the process so that the purpose-built team were working together from the moment that a program was green-lighted, right the way through to measurement and results. Now, the thing about a process is, at the end of the day, it's just a map. Nobody has to use it. So we needed to make sure that actually the process was actually used and it came to life and was effective and so on. And critical to that was the creation of a new role, project management. So we designed the role here specifically for the BBC, and Mandy Coombs, the head of creative operations at the BBC, built a team of project managers headed by a head of project management. Their job, quite simply, was to create the conditions for great work. Delivered on time, delivered on budget, and delivered on brief. The job spec could be summed up in just 3 words: make it happen. If we hadn't done this, there was a risk that the process would have just withered on the vine. So with the PM team on board, we were ready to start activating the changes to creative operations. So I thought you might like to know the key changes here. So I've broken this down into what's happening now and what's still being worked on. The change that's probably made the most difference is just having a single process in creative, but that process also extends to managing marketing and media and their involvement with creative as well. So, and there is now, moving from the briefs dropping out of the sky, there's now an annual plan in place. So project planning can start way before the project actually starts, whereas in the past, project planning didn't really start until it arrived at creative. So what that has meant is that the briefs are now on time, and in some cases, they're even early. And after some early issues with freelancers, there is now a very good team of permanent project managers running the process. A new function of strategic planning was introduced, which helps ensure that everything is rooted in an understanding of the audience, and that those early and on-time briefs are simply the best they can be. For the first time, the process was working across marketing, media, and creative, and as a result, the teamwork was beginning to get better. And at the end of the process, wash-ups were done, and importantly, the learning is applied to drive continual improvement of the process. So the process evolves through learning. In terms of the areas where the team is still getting there were some parts of our original solutions that the team is still embedding, and some are harder, and that's what the team are currently working on. But firstly, pre-presentation sessions are a new step before the presentation happens. And this is around avoiding that thing that so often happens, is you get the work right, and then you work out how to present it in the taxi on the way to the client. So this is a step that's separate from getting the work right, and it's actually about how are we going to present this in the best way. And it brings together marketing, creative, and media together, so that any issues can be addressed and any questions can be answered. So they're presenting the work together. And then reducing the number of decision makers so that we remove as many as possible of those unconstructive rounds of conflicting feedback. So the journey started on those, but as ever, Rome wasn't built in a day. The other thing about change in creative operations is that it's really important to think about how do you stop things slipping back to the old way of working, or to put it another way, how do you stop the jungle growing back? And the answer here, in our view, is measurement. So they say that what gets measured gets managed. So it's really important that you're measuring the right things. And it was also important that we remembered our brief, keep it simple. So we worked with Justin and Mandy to create 7 key metrics that would tell us how things are working and alert us to where there was a need to do things differently and better. We created a simple tool which made it easy to track and measure these, combined with an action plan per brand with timings and responsibilities. So there's a really active program of looking at how things are working, measuring them, and then making changes from the learnings from the metrics. Because I think, and you've heard me say this before, but I can't say it enough times, if there's one thing that's true about creative operations, that it is about continual improvement. So, Justin, what were the results?
Great. So as I was saying up front, I think for us, the critical things was the work getting better? Were we having the right impact on the way in which we were working inside the BBC and the reputation of this new team, but also the impact we were having on the audience? And that's how we were going to judge ourselves, and that's how we're going to be judged by the business. Promax is, I guess, probably the single most important awards ceremony for broadcast marketing in the UK. And I remember sitting at Promax in 2016, wanting to hide under the table as Channel 4 got up every single time to win awards for Superhumans, and thinking, how can we get better at this? And thankfully, in 2017, we became the most awarded broadcaster at the awards in November. And that was a real moment, and I think, we talked a lot about culture and morale and all the rest of it, and it was so important for the team to feel that all the hard work had started to bear fruit. So that was a really important signal. I think the second thing was the confidence amongst the marketing teams. In the early days of BBC Creative, we were having to fight really hard to stop marketers going externally. They still had the ability to do that. And unsurprisingly, the temptation was to say we can choose the best in the market, as opposed to going to this in-house team that's trying to form and trying to get better. So we had to work really hard to ensure that we got a chance on some of the key briefs and that we started to prove ourselves. And what's really encouraging going into next financial year, which starts in April, every new marketing brief is coming into the team with very, very little use, if any, of external agencies. There's a real vote of confidence from the in-house marketing teams. And the third happened at Christmas. And I think every new team needs a sort of single moment where you put yourself on the map, the sort of the campaign that defines you, as it were. And at Christmas this year, we produced one for BBC One that did that. And I'll just play this case study.
Stay tuned to BBC One as we are about to get you in the Christmas mood with a short animation about a little girl who loves to dance.
Have you seen the Christmas trailer?
Within 20 seconds, just gibbering.
Yeah.
It's so, honestly.
I was watching it, I was seeing what everyone's reactions going, oh my god, I'm crying, it's so sweet. I went, oh, here we go. I watched it cynically going, this is going to be terrible. I watched it 7 times. I think it's so good. John Lewis are spitting. That's what it should have been like. No, we should have done that. It is genuinely brilliant. It will melt even the coldest heart.
In January 2016, you dream of moments like that, and when it happens, it's fantastic. But I think it is fair to say, and Aidan said it to Jim, I think when you came in recently, that we couldn't have done that without having the right people focused on the right things at the right time to develop it, a really strong brief. You know, the brief landed in April. We had time to respond to it. We had time to craft it. We had the right people coming in at the right time. So I think although clearly creative operations is not a silver bullet, I think it had a big part to play in being able to achieve something like that. So, Jim.
Wow, follow that. You don't want me dancing. Well, anyway, so I thought I'd just wrap up with some key learnings that might be useful to you. So, first and foremost, I would say take a holistic view. If you're looking at your processes, don't look at your processes on their own. You need to look at your structure, your people, your tech, and they're all inextricably linked. So always take that holistic view. Secondly, find and eliminate those causes of unnecessary work that keep repeating themselves in your way of working. That will make, just doing that will make a huge difference to your capacity and therefore your quality of work, your timings and all the rest, all the things you need to deliver great work. Third, if you really want to make a difference, avoid top-down change. Engage your team in the change. It means they'll be hungry to make that change, and what that means is that the change will actually happen. Every business needs its process, but in a creative environment, great project management actually make it happen. And of course, coming back to measurement, make sure you're measuring the right things and use the results of the outcomes of those measurements to drive continual process. There's always something that can be improved. As creative operations specialists, you should always be, in our opinion, on the front foot, spotting and fixing the things that will make your team better and different, and therefore make your work better and different. Thank you.